the Johnversations Podcast. This is episode number 44. And as always, I'm your host, John Connor. My guest today is a city councilwoman from Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. She's been called the political millennial. Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, please welcome Miss Bethany Hallam. Bethany, thank you so much you get a big, loud crowd reaction. Thank you so much for being here. So how are you? This has been a crazy week. How are you doing?
I'm good. I wish I got that reaction every time I came into a room, actually. That was fabulous.
That's what I want when I walk into Target. I just want like, oh, shit. So, I was telling you before we started, I have been interested in having you on the show. I actually reached out to you like a month ago and things just get delayed especially when you're in a role like you are and there's a lot of things going on. And then we finally got everything ironed out. And then this has been like the week of all fucking weeks. So I'm so glad that you're here. I can't imagine having anybody else on, especially at this time that I would want to talk about these things with. I do have some questions as far as like, I want to know how you became interested in politics. I want to talk about all that. But first and foremost, I kind of wanted to ask you, how are you feeling after this week? I know, Pennsylvania, especially your county, was when you've got I use quotes, the quote unquote president out there, and he's talking about voter fraud and pushing this like crazy conspiracy theory agenda. Like your state is a big part of that, and your county is a huge part of that. So after seeing everything this week, like, how are you hanging in? Like, what is your thought process behind it? Because I'm just like, I'm fucking tired, man. And so I didn't know how you were feeling.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I'm actually on the Allegheny County Board of Elections. So I have had a lot of death threats, rape threats, just really nasty emails and Facebook messages coming my way leading up to the election and then ever since, right? So for anyone not familiar with Western Pennsylvania politics, I was sued personally as a member of the Board of Elections a couple dozen times by Donald Trump this year. That was definitely not something that I had on my 2020 bingo card, but I framed those and are going to put them up on the wall in a nice,
badge of honor.
Area, because who can say they got sued by Donald Trump? But I think that what we saw this week is something that a lot of us weren't surprised by. We've been hearing a lot of reports, especially from law enforcement officers in the DC area saying, how we could have never expected this. Even elected officials saying, who could have saw this coming? Well, a lot of us did. And a lot of us had been warning that this was going to happen, or something similar, something dangerous, something that was a complete and utter threat to our democracy. We saw this coming when Donald Trump was running in 2016. And yet for the past 4 years, we've seen a lot of things happening. And it's like, it blows my mind because every time something happens that any other president would have been crucified for, and it's like just a Tuesday for Donald Trump, And insane. So, yeah, this week has been a lot. We have a sitting state senator in Allegheny County who the state legislature is refusing to seat. So it's a democratically elected senator, and we have a Republican-controlled state legislature. And it made national news this week that not only was there a siege on the Capitol in D.C., but also in the Pennsylvania Capitol in Harrisburg, where, they refused to seat a state senator and then kicked out the lieutenant governor from the Senate chambers. So, this week has been one for the books, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And I'm with you when they're like, we never expected that this would happen. And it's like, well, you expected some shit to go down when Black Lives Matter was like 6 blocks from the Capitol because everybody was in riot gear there. And I've been having conversations with people. It's almost like, these are just nice white folks that are showing up. Like they're going to, they'll protest, but this is the party of law and order. These are the, like, it's wrong to kneel. Like they're not going to, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. And it's like, I've got a 2-year-old. And so my wife and I were sitting watching CNN, and How funny would it be if I was like, we were sitting there watching Newsmax or like we were glued to OAN. No, but we were watching CNN, and I was like, oh my God, dude, in like 15 years, they're going to be teaching her about this in history class. You know what I mean? And it's just.
Well, and let's hope so, right? Because what do we know a lot about our history is that kids in history classes aren't necessarily learning the full history of this country and really important movements, such as what's happening now, like bad movements can also be very important because they teach you lessons, and what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If we keep electing people who have the beliefs, who were supporters of Donald Trump, who are open white supremacists, racist, bigots, if we keep lifting up those voices, even if it's in a negative light, it gives them this platform over and over again. And when are we going to learn how many people have to lose their lives before it is guaranteed to be something that they teach in history to ensure that your daughter's generation doesn't repeat what's happening now?
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And I have a really hard time because, and I've said this on the show before, but I don't necessarily believe that every Trump supporter is a racist or homophobic or, some evil person. I think there's people out there with money that want to hold on to that money. I think there's people out here that are like, yeah, I don't like our immigration laws the way they are. And I can completely respect that. But I also believe that he has, I don't blame him for systemic racism. I don't blame him for violence, but I blame him for fanning the flames and letting those people come out of hiding into these areas where they feel emboldened or like it's okay for them to exist in our society as it is today. And it's heartbreaking. And I wonder how you feel about this, because the other thing that really frustrates me is, it seems like with that particular group of people, the goalpost is always moving, right? So it's you see something like George Floyd happen or something like Ahmaud Arbery happen, and it's like, well, if he wasn't in that neighborhood or if he would have just listened to the police. And then you see this woman who shot in the Capitol smashing through a window, and she was an unarmed woman. She served in the Air Force. Well, according to you, she wouldn't have been breaking the law. This wouldn't have happened. So it seems like when it's them, the goalposts keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and there's exceptions for them, but for everyone else, it's very, thin blue line. Follow A, B, and C, and you'll be okay. So, do you have any thoughts on that or any feelings around that?
Oh, I have a lot of feelings about that. So I think that so here in Allegheny County, Pittsburgh is the city center of the area that I represent. We had a young man, Antoine Rose, who was murdered by the police a couple years back. And so when George Floyd happened this past year and protests arose all over the country, that's been happening here in Pittsburgh for quite some time. Back to the 90s when Johnny Gamage was killed by police in the Pittsburgh area. This is something that's unfortunately not new to the people in the district that I represent. And so it's exhausting and it's frustrating. And whenever the protests have been popping up, especially in 2020, because I do feel that that's when they really came to some prominence and were so widespread compared to other times, at least in my life. We were in the streets in protesting and getting tear gas for peacefully walking down the streets. And so when folks like myself and my friends and other people who participated in protests for the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer are watching on mainstream media white folks, right? Because it was an overwhelmingly white crowd at the Capitol, who are physically assaulting police officers, and the police are backing off and letting them go. When they're pushing down barricades and the police are seen opening the gate to make it easier for them to get into barricades. When we're seeing that we're not even able to walk down the streets with a permit for a protest here in Pittsburgh without rubber bullets getting sprayed into a crowd, but yet there are white folks who are breaching the doors of a federal building of the United States Capitol and everyone's just standing back and allowing it to happen. You can't help but look at the contrast of, well, who was protesting the Black Lives Matter movement and who was rioting at the Capitol building. And those groups look differently and were so obviously treated differently. I read a tweet that said something like, well, there's no doubt now that the police do know de-escalation tactics and do understand not using force, but they just pick and choose when they're doing each tactic. And so it's just disappointing, but yet it's not at all surprising. I think that we've seen over and over and over again in so many cities across the country, no jurisdiction is immune to seeing the discrepancies and how folks are treated based off race, based off even political party. And it's discouraging, but again, it just shows that we have so much work to do. And I think, to me, the most frustrating part out of all of this, and there's so much to be sad and mad and frustrated about right now, but to me, the absolute most frustrating part about all this is hearing people say, this is not America. Because for so many folks, absolutely, this is America. This is the America we were warning you about, that we've been seeing the signs of, that we've been experiencing. But it's just that you haven't been affected by it. So you think that this is not America, but for so many people, this is the America that they've known, and we have so much work to do.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It really is like there's two Americas, and it's so frustrating because, you see, like you said, you see the cops that were opening the barriers, or the cops that were, just moving out of the way and letting people go through. And I saw, I'm, for the community that I live in, I'm in just a community Facebook group. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, like a lot of community Facebook groups, it is very much, here's a something going on in the world. And then so I'm in Tennessee. So I grew up in Michigan. I've been in Tennessee for about 7 years. So I still very much, Michigan is a lot more of a liberal place than Tennessee. So when I look at it, I feel like, okay, you've got progressive people, and then you've got the good old boys, and the good old boys are the ones that are like, well, if they just follow the law, this wouldn't happen. You know what I mean? So I see in this group, I see people saying, well, it's not that the police didn't want to stop it. It's just that they were overwhelmed. But why were they overwhelmed is my question. It's were they overwhelmed because this group that was coming wasn't as quote unquote scary to them as someone like Black Lives Matter, or hell, if this was, in Dearborn, Michigan, we have a huge population of Muslims. What if it was a Muslim protest group? Like, what the fuck would have happened then? Like, it'd be like if this was Black Lives Matter or like some kind of peaceful Muslim protest, we would have seen a bloodbath on national television, where because it's Trump supporters and it's all, I like the term vanilla ISIS is my favorite term, but because it's vanilla ISIS, like you see cops that are like holding a woman's hand, just like, let's walk down the steps. I'll make sure you get to the bottom safely.
Taking selfies with the rioters in the Capitol that they just breached.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, where are the rubber bullets when you want them? Right. Where like go ahead, carte blanche. I'm cool. You know what I mean? So it's, and for people who, like you said, for people who said that, like, oh, well, we just didn't think this would ever happen. Like, look at places like Michigan, like Minnesota, where, the president is tweeting out, liberate Michigan, and people are storming the Capitol months ago over lockdowns for COVID. And then, something like this happened. It's like, I don't understand how you can, it feels like willful ignorance to not be prepared for what happened.
I almost think it's a borderline brainwashing. I really do, because I have talked to a lot of people, and to me, a super unique population of people that I talk to are people whose spouses were brainwashed by Trump, right? They thought that they had this relationship, they were married for 20 years, and then all of a sudden 2016 comes around in this rhetoric, this narrative, because remember, it's all about messaging and language, and the Republican Party is great at it. The Democratic Party sucks at it, right? And so I've talked to people who literally filed for divorce because they couldn't, like, they felt that their spouse was no longer someone that they knew because they were so brainwashed, and it hasn't discriminated based off of age or geography. It seems to have be so widespread. And it really is scary. And I do worry that one of our biggest problems going forward is going to be that we have, and when I say we, I often mean like the elected Democrats, the Democratic Party, spend so much time messaging around like we have to get rid of Trump. And okay, Trump's gone. But as you mentioned not that long ago, Trump is just a symptom of the greater problem. This racism, white nationalism, this didn't start with Trump. He didn't bring that. He just made it acceptable for people to act out how they felt. And when people's feelings and ideas are reinforced, they're more likely to, full steam ahead with them. And so I think that we need to be very careful that we're always saying like, Trump was not alone in this. We're seeing all these resignations from the cabinet right now. We're seeing a lot of long-term Republican politicians saying they won't seek re-election next year. And we're seeing this happening, and we need to make sure that we hold those people accountable. Like, you didn't leave until an angry mob stormed the U.S. Capitol while the Senate was in session. Right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what it took to get you to leave. Everything that's happened all along the way was okay by you. You waited until 2 weeks out from the inauguration of a new president. You waited until a riot on sacred ground to care. So I have no sympathy for any of these people. I've heard reporters talking about how, everyone in the Capitol's worried, they're on their way out, a new administration's coming in, and they're worried that their association with Republicans and with the Trump administration is going to make them unemployable. And I sure as hell hope that it does.
Oh, 110%. And that's the other thing that really frustrates, you see people like Mitch McConnell's, what's her name? Elaine Cho, I think her last name is, or, Betsy DeVos. That's one of my favorite. You see all these people that are like, well, I have to resign. Where the fuck were you for 4 years? Like, what? Like, kids in cages isn't the thing where you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't hitch my hitch my wagon to this horse. You know what I mean? So and then to come out and act like you're making some sacrifice, or like you're like, I'm so noble. I just saw that, this was an attack on our democracy. Like, yeah, dude, you built the Lego house that they came in and smashed down. Not to quote Ed Sheeran. I'm a big fan, but like, I don't understand. I don't know. Or someone like Josh Hawley, for example, who he lost his book deal. So now he's on Twitter being like, oh, well, I guess you can't have free speech in this country.
My First Amendment rights to a book deal.
Yeah. Or like Ted Cruz, who's like, my heart breaks for Heidi and I are just praying. We're just praying for this, the family of this police. Well, it's like, dude, maybe if you wouldn't have said you were going to object. And that's the thing that drove me crazy, is that when he got up, he said, well, 39%, that's my Ted Cruz. It's very good. 39% of Americans, they think it's kind of like George Bush, like Mr. Burns. But he's basically saying 39% of Americans believe there was election fraud. And I think Chris Cuomo said it best, but like, yeah, 39% think there's election fraud because you've been screaming election fraud since the beginning. So like, you plant the seed, you water the seed of doubt, and then you're like, well, look at all these people who don't believe it. You know what I mean? So it's, I don't know. I have a particular, and I will use the word hatred for Ted Cruz. I hope one day he
out
listens
in your
to
accent when you're talking as him.
Dude, yeah. I've said some things to him on Twitter that I would gladly say to his face in person, just because I don't know. I can't, and I'm a really nice guy. I don't like to go after, I don't hate a lot of people. I have a burning, like, in my heart is like a barbecue brisket, just like on fire when I think about that guy. But to do what he did, and then to go up there and just be like, oh, well, our hearts are so broken. It's, I just don't understand. I don't know if it's because he's trying to, and I think what it is he's trying to get Trump's base behind him. So if he runs in 2024, he's like, well, look what I did for you guys. Where it's like, okay, you're selling out the country, you're selling out yourself, you're selling out your constituents at a chance of maybe some, because to a lot of them, I think he's always going to be Lion Ted. And I don't think it matters what he does. That's always going to be a part of it. So it's looking at these people and let me ask you this. What do you think about the people who changed their vote after or who were going to object and then decided not to after everything happened?
I do not care. Again, too little, too late. You jump ship after you already knew what was going to happen. I mean, how many court cases did it take? How many millions of dollars? And that's raised off the backs of people, right? Well, not me because I didn't donate them, but do you know what I mean? We, the people, were the ones who funded these lawsuits. And we were the ones who were negatively impacted while Trump's just having a field day in court trying to challenge election results. And to me, the second that you, as an elected official, as a sitting congressperson, as a sitting senator, the second that you object in any way, shape, or form, or say that there's any sort of fraud, as a member of the Board of Elections, I can tell you that first of all, there was no fraud. There has been audit after audit in state after state. There's no fraud, right? But they were objecting only to the results of one single race. So what they're saying is whoever interfered, whoever, was acting fraudulently to interfere in this election, that they went through all that trouble to do it, but then they completely skipped over all the down ballot races. Here in Pennsylvania, we had mail-in voting for the first time ever, and that was why, often we were the subject of a lot of these lawsuits. Mm-hmm. And so we had people who are trying to sit here and say, we should have never had mail-in voting, like Republicans, right? Well, it was Republican-sponsored legislation. It was their idea to get rid of straight ticket voting so that you can no longer vote, hit the Democrat button or hit the Republican button. You have to go through and individually select candidates. We in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania, but down ballot, we got slaughtered. Mm-hmm. We lost 2 of our statewide row offices. We lost seats in the state house. We lost seats in the state Senate. Literally nothing good happened in Pennsylvania in 2020 except for Joe Biden winning it. Everything else was so bad. And so, for someone, especially the fact that every member of the U.S. House was on the ballot at the same time as Trump, right? And so you're saying that you're going to sit here and get sworn in for your race because those were legitimate results. But the person right above you on the ballot, oh, no. That was shady. There was fraud there. It just doesn't make sense. And any rational human being has to be able to see that. And whenever the Democrats lost in 2016, we were out in the streets with like pink woven hats on. When y'all lost in 2020, you're breaking windows in the U.S. Capitol and killing a police officer in the U.S. Capitol and, acting like these conspiracy theories. I mean, I have a friend who has gone pretty far off the deep end, in the past few years in their political beliefs, who sends me graphics like, oh, you need to read this, or videos. You need to read this and you need to wake up. You need to stop being a sheep. Who is the sheep when an outgoing president is telling you to commit a federal offense, a felony, and you're just like, that's my president. No questions asked. And it's not like any other act where you can maybe the reason, the backing of it is subjective, that up for interpretation. These people had MAGA hats on and Trump flags and Confederate flags and Nazi flags. I saw a guy in a Camp Auschwitz hoodie. Yep. I mean, there's no doubt in who is behind this and why this happened. And so I just think that we have so much work to do, and anybody who is complicit in doubting the results of a legitimate election that, again, has been proven over and over and over again that it's legitimate. You should see the emails in my inbox of people saying I'm going to burn in hell for fraudulently certifying election results.
It's insane.
Where did this come from? And how do I even respond to something like that when I know that I can say every court in the land has said there was no fraud? Every audit from every Department of Elections from every state has said there was no fraud. But yet, because one person, and now there's no one around him reinforcing it either, but there's this one person telling you that there's fraud and that you should not trust an election, that is a threat to everything that this country is founded on, and it's a threat to any future elections going forward. And in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of a lot of people, that's how we flipped those seats in Georgia, was because Trump told everyone, don't go vote, elections are fraudulent. Mm-hmm. there was people they were interviewing when they were out canvassing who wrote in Trump's name for the Georgia Senate seats. Like, thank you for that, because one of those races we won by like 13,000 votes, So I think that they don't realize the danger it's going to cause for the Republican Party. But then for all of us as a whole, just the threat to democracy, you can't forgive that. You cannot forgive anyone for supporting that, because it's just unforgivable, and the damage that's been caused is beyond repair. So I don't care if you changed your mind in the past week. No, it absolutely does not matter to me.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, they were wearing Trump hats, Bethany, but it was Antifa.
In disguise.
It was Antifa. They had Trump hats and Trump flags, but they also had knee pads, because those Antifa pussies all wear knee pads. You know what I mean? That's what Alex Jones, that's a quote from Alex Jones. These guys out here, they're all wearing knee pads because they're scared. They're scared, man.
It's just so ironic that the fascists who stormed the Capitol are being called anti-fascists, right? Because I don't think that most people have a grasp of like Antifa. First of all, it is not a group. There is no membership to Antifa. There's no sign up or dues you can pay to belong to Antifa. All it means is that you are against fascism. And if there is people in this country who are not against fascism, admit that, but you never hear them say that. Antifa is bad because I'm a fascist. You never hear anybody admitting that.
I'm pro-fascist.
Exactly. Like, okay, the pro-fascist and the anti-fascist, which side are you on,
Right.
And so that's where I think that we have a lot of work to do around messaging, because that's where we messed up, right? That's where we messed up, is having demands and not getting the message out there, like this is how we achieve the demands. This is why we need these demands. And, just unifying around a message as opposed to all these fractured groups, because it's obviously that the fascism side of this debate are unified and organized and are planning violent coups in this country. And so I just would like to see the good guys be as organized and be able to organize for good, because that's where I see us really lacking. And that's where I think we have the most ground to make up to prevent things like this happening. Because when folks are in groups such as they were at the Capitol, that's when they're the most dangerous. When you're able to break apart at them and split them up, that's when we have a better chance at overcoming all this hate. But where we are right now, we are in such a dark time.
Yeah, and I agree. And quick question. So you don't have to pay dues to be in Antifa? Because if not, I've been sending checks to people that I need to get back. So, no, and I'm with you. Like that. Well, is Antifa. They have their Antifa. It's like, you realize the Proud Boys. You get beat into the Proud Boys, and it's so fucking. It's like, say as many breakfast cereals as you can. It's so stupid. But it's you're right. No one comes out and says like, yeah, well, I'm pro Tifa. You know what I mean? Like I want it's China all day, baby. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. It's just so again, it blows my mind that like there are groups of people online that are being like, yeah, these are patriots. They went into their house and they're sending a message, and it's like, again, if it was Al Qaeda, you know what I mean? Like if like after 9/11, these people just showed up at the Capitol and stormed in, you'd be like, open fire on all of them as soon as one opened the door. But it's and you're right. I think it's very much like the rhetoric has. So I was talking to somebody, a good friend of mine, who they migrated to the country legally. And so for them, legal immigration and like following the rules and doing it correctly is very important to them, which I completely understand. And because of that, they kind of gravitated to Trump, because he wants tighter borders, build the wall. And then as the last 4 years have gone on, it's like you almost become indoctrinated into like this group. And, so I asked them, I said, okay, where was the fraud? Where was the election fraud? Because there's been 60 plus court cases where the lawyers will say there's no fraud. Also, the only person I've seen get arrested for fraud is the guy who used the ballot for his mother to vote for Trump, which I thought was, mwah, it was fucking.
That was here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I know. It was beautiful. I was like, thank you for this guy. But I asked her, I said, where is the evidence? She goes, it's all around. You just have to look. And I said, well, they say Jesus is all around, but I don't believe in him either. So like where is the proof? Like,
I'm looking. Where is it?
Right. Like, show me. And that's always the response. And it's always the whataboutism. You know what I mean? Well, it's, there's no evidence. Yeah. Well, what about Hillary? She should be locked up for being in, and it's like, that's not what we're talking about. And if Hillary was going to go to jail, it's been 4 years, she probably would have gone to prison by now. I did want to ask, like, what do you think? Because you mentioned the messaging, and you're right. Republicans are lower taxes, stronger borders. They've got their like at least historical like Republicans. Now I don't know what the fuck it is, but like historically that's been the message, right? Like bring back the lower class or the middle class, trickle down in economics. And it feels like with the Democrats almost that we have to be so inclusive of everything. It's like, yeah, I have to be into trans rights, and I have to be into more lenient immigration, and I have to be into universal health care. And it's like legalize pot and stop putting black people in jail for weed when white people are going, just getting a ticket and driving off. So in your opinion, as someone who is kind of, I mean, you're living it, you're on the election council, like you're a politician. How do you think we fix that? Or what do you think we need to do as far as branding to like get, because I feel like if we just picked one or two things, like, hey, we want to make weed legal for everybody, that right. like left and right would be like, fuck yeah, buddy. You know what I mean? It's like something to buy into, but we just can't get like the slogan down,
Yeah. And I think that in my opinion, of course, and I know other people will have different opinions on this, but I think that there's three main issues that any candidate, you pick this, you're winning, right? So you see in federally, like I was looking for a president who was going to fight for these issues and I didn't get one. But I think legal weed is a huge thing because I know a hell of a lot of people who don't vote, but would vote just to get legal weed, right? So to me, something that I've learned just being involved in politics, I've learned that it's not this hypothetical swing voter that you're trying to get. Like you hear that, you read every article of the New York Times, the undecided swing voter. That does not exist. That doesn't exist. I feel like they use the same swing voter in every story to act like they're everywhere. What, to me, the way that you win elections is activating the non-voters, the people who for years and years, maybe they never even registered. Maybe they registered and every time they see an election come around, there's not a single candidate who either A, reached out to them or B, spoke a message that was relatable to them, right? Like when I ran for office, I looked at the people who were elected officials in my area. And I was like, not a single one of these people has any idea what I've been through and therefore can't relate and can't understand that so many other people have gone through similar situations, right? So I am a big fan of activating the non-voter. So legalization of cannabis to me is the number one of the number one issues. I have three, right? But that absolutely has to come along with releasing people from incarceration who are serving time for possession or selling cannabis. Because what we're starting to see already, I don't know, what do you guys have any legal cannabis in Tennessee?
So in Tennessee, we have CBD is legal under the Farm Bill, but these pot kids, or as Bill O'Reilly would call them, the slackers and the burnouts. We have something down here that's called Delta 8, where they've figured out how to take hemp and then synthetically extract like the THC from that. And it's not Delta 9 THC, it's Delta 8. So from what I understand, because I don't know who's listening to this podcast, what I understand is the Delta 8 is very similar to like your traditional, they call it diesel power, very, very similar, but it has less of the paranoia or like anxious feeling with it.
You get high.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just doesn't, and it doesn't last as long. So
can anybody get it, or do you need a medical card? So
here, anyone can get it. But then what happened was the DEA found out about it, and the DEA goes, well, no, that's still THC. And then everyone who makes it's like, nah, bitch, Farm Bill. Like, we're making this from hemp, like you said we could. And so then the DEA says it's illegal, but the Farm Bill says it's not. So right now here, I know there are some places that are like, fuck it, our lawyers told us go ahead and sell it. We're not breaking the law. And then there's some places who've built businesses on this where their lawyers are saying, listen, man, don't sell it because they could come in and raid you at any time. It kind of reminds me of when
Four Locos is what it sounds like to me.
Right? Yeah. Or like when it first became like when Colorado was the state, you remember? Yeah. And like, you didn't know if the feds were just going to come in one day and take all your shit. And now it's like, nobody cares, but like they were like the only one. So they were under the microscope. So it's, we've got that. But then again, I'm from Michigan, and Michigan now is completely like, you don't need a card. Yeah. I moved away from Michigan, and they made fireworks legal and they made pot legal. And I was like, I left at the wrong time.
We actually just not that long ago made fireworks legal, and we have medicinal cannabis.
Okay.
But I think what we're seeing a lot of is like now we have all these white people who are making a shit ton of money off of legal cannabis. Mm-hmm. And we have all these black and brown people like spending literally life in prison for like a dime bag of weed, right? Multiple offenders, you can end up in prison for life for that. And so I think that is a really, really important issue that is easy messaging. We want weed for everyone, right? I know we're supposed to say cannabis because it sounds medical. It's the official term, but like, if you're campaigning on weed for everyone, I think that's a great start for you, right? I think the next thing that we as the Democratic Party should be really fighting for is a federal minimum wage that's actually a livable wage. I've seen people now saying like, oh, Joe Biden's for $15 an hour. We were asking for $15 an hour 10 years ago. It's too late. $15 an hour isn't shit anymore. It is 2021, at least the $20 an hour minimum wage, right? Because when we talk about the Republicans and we talk about them, it's like the upper echelon of the rich folks, right? When I grew up, that was how I always learned about Democrats and Republicans, right? Democrats are the working class and the Republicans are rich. And so when you want to get everyone else, that's how you do it, because really not all Republicans are rich. There are lots and lots of Republicans who completely vote against their interests and don't understand that, hey, Trump's tax bill actually is making you pay more taxes, whereas Joe Biden doesn't want you to pay more taxes unless you're making $400,000 a year, which no one I know is, right? So I really think that like a $20 an hour living wage is the next thing, and then healthcare for everyone. And I know people want to say like Medicare for all. I don't personally like that, whatever floats your boat. But I think just like we're giving you all healthcare. End of story. You're not paying for it. You get great healthcare like everyone does. And it benefits the people who need it the most. And something that I learned running for office is like, that's what people want. All those non-voters, they're not voting, not because they're bad people. They're not voting because they have, in their mind, no reason to. People who aren't like politics day in, day out, like my life is, they don't understand electoral politics and why it matters even if you're voting for the lesser of two evils, because you could end up with like evil like we've had for 4 years. And so I think that that's really important, that those are three big issues that are simple messaging to the point. Of course, like you mentioned, you're going to talk about like rights for LGBTQIA people. You're going to talk about further criminal justice reform initiatives. You're going to talk about big pharma and big tech and all of this, but you need to have three core pillars that you as a candidate, you as an elected official, you as a party stand for. And to me, those are three winning ones that there's no up for interpretation. What do we mean when we say healthcare for all? We mean that every single one of you is going to get healthcare. What do we mean when we say a $20 an hour minimum wage? Not a single person is going to make less than $20 an hour. What do we mean when we say legal cannabis? Walk into your grocery store and buy a bag of weed. You know, like it's so simple and clear and to the point, and it would affect so many people because the tax revenue alone on the legal cannabis industry would change look at the deficit.
Yeah, Colorado's fucking balling right now.
stolen, right? And so I'm a big fan of like free public education, like free public college. And I know that that's something that was maybe talked about on the presidential campaign trail, but the tax revenue on cannabis alone would fund that. The tax revenue on cannabis alone could help fund Medicare for all. You know, the tax revenue on cannabis alone could build up our infrastructure and make our communities safer across the entire nation. But instead, we have people who are voting against their own best interests, and therefore our legislators, not just on the federal level, but on state levels all across the country, you know, aren't where they could be.
Yeah, and I think that's a much better, you know, because my favorite thing is, like you said, like if you're not making over $400,000 an hour, my favorite thing online has been like, it's the picture of the popcorn ceiling. And it's like, if your ceiling looks like this, don't worry about Biden's tax plan. Or like,
we have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, they're so good. And the thing is, the house that I live in, it was built in the 70s. So we have popcorn ceilings. And I was like, go fuck yourself, man. But I think that's a much better way if you're like, yeah, let's not even talk about raising taxes. Let's sell you weed and just tax the weed, you know? Cause like, you know, like, yeah, we could fucking tax Jeff Bezos what he should be taxed, and that would pay for a lot of stuff too. But then, but that comes along with the like, well, I don't want my taxes going, where it's like, no, let me just give you something that you don't have to go someplace shady and buy now. Right. You can just go into, Piggly Wiggly or wherever you go and be like, all right, cool, I'm good. I'm going to roll out. And like you said, the income, and the other thing that breaks my heart, because it's exactly what you said, that, you see those posts online where it's like Harvard graduate is looking at $50 million profit boom from legal cannabis operation. And then the comment underneath is, oh yeah, my uncle was trying to do the same thing. He's in prison now for 30 years. You know what I mean? It's just, I think it goes to the two different Americas. You know what I mean? And especially when you look at something like the amount of people who are pulled over or caught with pot versus the amount of blacks versus white in prison because of pot. It's something that is used in over policing in a lot of communities, and it's fucked up. And I think it would make the playing field a whole lot more level, especially when you have something like that that's on Schedule 1, but you can be walking around with meth and get a ticket. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. And the other thing too is I really like about your messaging, but like I think about like the farmer in Arkansas. Like those are things I think that even he could get, but yeah, legalize pot because my back hurts from, picking corn, and $20 minimum wage. Maybe that one he's not, on board on, but then the free healthcare, you know what I mean? You're a farmer, you own your own business. Like I think that message there, as opposed to that guy isn't necessarily, I don't even want to say doesn't care, but he's probably not as invested in LGBTQ issues because he's like, I don't fucking know anybody in Greensboro that, you know what I mean? Like, so it's find those things where you can get everybody. And I think you're right as far as like the undecided voter. I've got plenty of friends that are like, they're both pieces of shit. Neither one of them's going to do anything. So I'm not going to vote, and it's like, let me ask you, how do you feel about those people bitching after the fact? Because I have a real problem with people being like, they're both pieces of shit and I'm not going to vote for them. But then like 6 months later, well, Biden isn't doing anything. I was like, you should have voted for the other dude, you fucking idiot. Like.
So I hear that argument a lot, but I still default to mine. Like those people who didn't vote and then are bitching after the fact, I want to hate them. I want to be mad at them. But at the end of the day, the reason is still there why they didn't vote. Neither of those candidates spoke to them. How can we expect them to go and vote for someone? Why does someone deserve their vote? Right. So like me, I went and I voted for Joe Biden. I held my nose when I did it. Right. He was not in my top 10 candidates in the Democratic primary when it first started. But I understand, because I understand how electoral politics works, that like at the time we weren't going to get the Senate. There was like, that was not even in the realm of possibilities. We barely held the House. I understood why it was so important to make sure that the Republicans didn't for 4 more years control the White House and the Senate. Right. So I understood that, but I wasn't at all excited about it. But that's me. I understand why people bitch, because they're paying taxes to a government that isn't working for them. And the options that were on their ballot were not options that were going to work for them. So, I in the back of my head really want to be mad when I see, my best friend in the whole world, he doesn't vote, right? I forced him to register earlier this year. He just got out of prison for a DUI on his prescription medication that he was taking for his recovery from opioid use disorder. Like, he is a person who has a lot of things in his life that voting could help. But because he's never had a candidate who said that they were going to do those things for someone like him, he's like, why would I vote? Yeah, I'll sit here and I'll talk shit on Trump. I'll sit here and I'll talk shit on Biden, but I'm not going to vote because it doesn't do anything for me. And most of the time, he's not wrong. It's only, at least here locally, it's only been the past few years where we started having like actual progressives running, challenging longtime incumbents with, fancy last names and 6-digit campaign accounts. And you never thought that anybody could take them out. And then we started having these regular people running for office who were like, listen, I'm nothing like this dude. I actually am a real person with real life experiences like you. So I can tell you how I'm going to help you. Right. And so that's still a brand new thing here. And in a lot of places, a brand new thing that's starting to happen where people who maybe never cared about politics before finally starting to get involved because they're seeing it affect their life and they're realizing this is the way to fix it. That's how I got involved in politics. I was really pissed off about a lot of things that had happened to me, things I had seen in my life. And I realized that I could sit at home and be pissed all day, or I could go run for office and actually fight to change it. And so not everyone has that same path in their life. And so I feel like until we are on every ballot in every jurisdiction in the entire country, having candidates that are inspirational to regular everyday people, having candidates who have walked the walk and talked the talk and are like out there just telling us that they're going to fight for us, I can't be mad at someone who doesn't vote. I would feel so guilty doing it. Instead, what I try to do is talk to those people, find out why they didn't vote, and explain to them how, well, hey, I have this candidate that's thinking about running. Like, would you be interested in supporting someone like this? Or if there's no one on your ballot that excites you to vote for, maybe you should go run for office yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why you're a councilwoman and I just sit here and talk to people. Because I'm just like, this fucking idiot, I can't. Someone shut him up. And you're like, no, like you should do it. If there's no, I'm like, just shut this guy up. Now, I wanted to ask you this because I will tell you, when I first became aware of you, I was watching CNN on election night and you came on. And first, let me ask you this. Being someone who just decided you were going to run and then you win, you beat the incumbent, you win. I'm
on fucking CNN.
And then hold on, it's Chris Cuomo. So he's like, we've got Bethany Hallam. And then he cuts to you. And I was like, so first, what was that feeling like to go from like, I'm going to run for city councilwoman. And then you're like, I'm on CNN in the middle of the most divisive election of our American history. Like, I would just be like dabbing my forehead a million times.
I did not see that part coming when I ran for office. I actually did know that I was like inherently my seat, the at-large seat on county council by default has a seat on the board of elections, right? So I did know that I was getting into that, but I grossly underestimated what the 2020 elections were going to be like, right? Like I knew it was going to be a little wild. I had no idea I was going to be constantly sued. First it was to purge our voter rolls even before the election. They wanted us to make a bunch of voters ineligible. And then as the election proceeded, it was about, making sure naked ballots weren't allowed. And remember, our voting rules in Pennsylvania changed this year. It was brand new method of voting for every single voter in Pennsylvania. So shit was confusing. The instructions were confusing, And so, just like all of that was unfolding. Like I was watching it as it unfolded like everyone else was. And then, as we got closer to the election, I realized like we started doing a lot of like public service announcements, like myself, some other elected officials got naked actually to raise awareness.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, it was hilarious. And I was like, this is a genius fucking idea. Like if anybody sees this, they're going to be like, what is this all about? And it immediately gets their attention.
Yeah, and it worked, right? Because they went from predicting that we were going to have 100,000 naked ballots in Pennsylvania to having like 10,000, So that difference right there decided the election, So it was huge, and it was literally just a bunch of female elected officials naked on social media, and people were furious about it. Like, oh, this is the new wave of politicians are going to get naked to get your vote. Like, we weren't even running. We just wanted you to know how to vote properly, And so once that really took off, that kind of like, had a mind of its own and really just blew up. And then the CNN thing, I mean, I definitely never thought I was going to be on CNN. And to be honest, that was at like 12:30 in the morning. They like called me at like 10 o'clock and were like, hey, can you go downtown to the studio at midnight and talk to Don Lemon is who they told me it was, right? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I'm like on my phone Googling who Don Lemon is, right? And so whenever I actually was on that, I thought that I was being interviewed by Don Lemon because you can't see the TV. So then all these people are sending me screenshots after it happened. And they're like, oh my God, you were on CNN. And I was like, who the fuck is that guy I'm talking to? That's not Don Lemon, And
he looks a lot different than Don Lemon. I Googled Don Lemon. That's not Don Lemon.
And so it was just such a surreal experience because, it's my role in the Board of Elections is really so different than my role as a county council member. When I'm on the Board of Elections, I'm completely nonpartisan, right? I am there to make sure that elections are conducted fairly and accurately and that our results are beyond reproach. So I'm not there to get on my soapbox and be like, Joe Biden's going to pull this out for Pennsylvania, because at that point, I didn't care about that. I just wanted the election to run smoothly and the results to be accurate,
Right.
So I'm just sitting there and just like spitting out numbers. People were like, wow, I'm so impressed. And I don't think it hit me until the next day when like people I'd never heard of were like, I saw you on CNN. But it was such a, my story 4 years ago, I was in jail.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk to you about that. That was, kind of what I was going to transition to. But
yeah, so jail to CNN in 4 years. I mean, that is like, I deserve like the MVP comeback player of the year, So.
No, 100%. Well, and it was crazy because what stuck out to me is as soon as you came on, I'm 35, right? So like, I'm not a young man, but I'm not an old man. I'm like, I'm just old enough to be kind of an asshole, but I'm still young enough to be idealistic. So I'm in that like weird place. But when you came out, I was like, oh, like this. I was like, this person she's a younger lady, and the confidence that and again, maybe it's because you thought you were talking to Don Lemon, but like the confidence that you came out with, and the whole night. I mean. I don't think anybody knew just how bad it was going to get after, but the whole night, everyone knew that this election was going to be insane and that there was no way that by the end of the evening we were going to know. There's a lot of pressure on people. But you came out with this confidence. You're like, yep, we're stopping the count. We got to do this. They messed up. They sent too many ballots. So we're getting that fixed. And I was just like, wow, like who is this person? Because there's some people that you see on TV that you're just like, oh, I want to know more about this person. You know what I mean? And so that's when I started doing the Google, as the kids call it. And I started finding your story and things like that. And I was like, I don't know. I'm a fan of younger folks getting themselves, because let me ask you this. What do you think about term limits? Because I see somebody like you and you make me really hopeful, where I'm like, you've got somebody like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz that, are, Mitch McConnell's a millionaire. You know what I mean? Like Nancy Pelosi is a millionaire. Ted Cruz doesn't make as much as them, but he's still got a shit ton of money. And these are people that we're looking at that are like, well, we're here to represent you. We're like, we're for the people, baby. We're like, and it's, when you look at somebody else, when you've got X amount of money and you're a politician, it becomes kind of apparent that even if your intentions are good, you're not really about the people. You're about, how do I continue to live my lifestyle? You know what I mean? So like, what do you feel about term limits, and do you think we're going to see more people like you kind of starting to come in the ranks and rise up a little bit?
First of all, yes. As long as I have anything to do with it, I mean, that is my whole purpose, is to help pave the way for other people like candidates prior to me did for me. You know, like I realize I'm not going to be in this role for forever, nor should I be. And I want to make sure that there are capable people ready to step in and fill the role when I'm gone, right? In regards to term limits, I'm actually not a fan of term limits. I think we already have term limits, and they're called elections. I think the real solution to the problem that you were describing about like Nancy Pelosi and other super long tenured politicians is that they do become out of touch with their constituency because they're no longer like them. Even if they were, whenever they first got elected, after decades of being in office, they've become so out of touch because they're not a person anymore. They're now a politician. You know, I actually hate when people call me a politician because I'm not. I mean, I'm broadcasting live right now from my parents' basement in my bedroom where I have a laundry basket on my bed upside down to hold my laptop. You know, like this is what I think everyone should be that is representing us, that's making decisions that's going to affect our lives. Because I can guarantee you that me in the seat that I'm in right now can relate to the people of Allegheny County or of any constituency so much more than Nancy Pelosi in her mansion right now, right? And so I believe that it takes time to learn how to do a job as best possible. Like I've noticed, I've been in office for a year now, and my entire term has been COVID, you know, which was not another thing I wasn't expecting when I was running for office. But I've been learning the procedures. Like I know what I want to get done, but learning how to do it. I mean, it's been a year and I'm still not confident that I'm an expert in the process. And so that's why I think the term limits are bad, because I actually think that it's a disservice to people like me who come into office and are figuring it out. You know, and so I do think the campaign finance reform, publicly funded elections, I think that that's really where the changes are that we could see help make sure that the electorate is representative of the people they represent, right? We live in a representative democracy, so that they serve us. Elected officials, politicians, they serve the people. That's their job, no one else. But yet, so often they're serving themselves and their family members and their friends, and not all of us.
Yeah, well, and it's like you said, like, you know, when you see how much money Ted Cruz has made from the NRA, you know what I mean? And it's like, I guess where I get worried is even with like, you can only spend X amount of money on an election. Like, how do you stop the, like, because essentially if somebody donates money to an election, that money is supposed to be used for that election fund. But how do you stop, you know, the workarounds to that? Because it's not like every penny that the NRA is given is like, oh, we're spending this all on elections. You know what I mean? And I think we've seen that, you know, I think Trump illustrated that very well with his quote unquote defense fund to stop the steal, where it's like, hey, you guys are paying all my debt and I'm putting this money in my pocket. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. You know, so it's, I don't know. I'm with you where I think the finance aspect definitely needs to be looked at, because I think if it's looked at and I really think a big problem is that people don't trust. It's hard for people to become engaged because of things like that. They don't trust their politicians because it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. I don't have the money. So whoever has the money, that's going to be the.
And they're not wrong.
Yeah.
That's how it's always been.
Yeah. And so, you know, maybe some campaign finance reform would fix that. And maybe it would get people to be, I don't know, be more optimistic, think that their voice does matter. I did want to ask you this. And after this, I want to kind of talk about, I know we started off, I want to talk about your story and I want to talk to you about criminal justice reform. But right before we hopped on tonight, I got the news alert that Trump has been permanently banned from or suspended from Twitter. I was ecstatic. I was so happy. But I know there's also the whole, like, you know, is it better to combat bad speech with good speech? Or, you know, I know you had a tweet that, you know, a lot of people, which by the way, your tweet I fucking loved. I thought it was awesome. But so good or bad, do you think, like, because there are some people being like, hey, that's great, it's 4 years too late. and then there's people that are like, well, we shouldn't suspend them at all. So what do you think?
I think it's 4 years too late. I think that I almost want to say I know that the only reason that this is happening is because now the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and big tech, right? Facebook, Twitter, all that, Amazon even know that now, right? So it's like, if you really cared, you would have done this before an angry mob rioted at the Capitol building, right? Too late. People died because of that. People died because Trump told them to go there. Because sitting congressmen, sitting senators told their constituents that the election was fraudulent. Like, that is why this all happened. So they don't have a platform to get that message out without things like social media, right? Because as many people as there may be out there watching the OAN, right? It's not as much as the people on Twitter.
Newsmax, baby. The green screen of a lifetime. It looks like the worst fucking public access television I've ever seen. It's so bad.
Yeah, this should have happened a long time ago, and I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, it's because they were talking about, like, you know, he violated our terms by inciting a riot and inciting violence, and it's, well, what about liberate Michigan? They broke into the Capitol of Michigan, and he was like, go for it, you know what I mean?
Kidnap the governor and elected officials, remember, is what they wanted to do.
Yeah, which bunch of, oh my God, again, Vanilla ISIS, man. It's a bunch of just like, even in Michigan.
I've never heard that, and I love that term.
Oh yeah, it's my favorite. It's but you know, it's just like these people wanting to play like G.I. Joe out in the woods, you know what I mean? And
right.
This SNL did a sketch I thought was hilarious. They were like, we're going to kidnap the governor. And they're like, well, what are you going to do once you have her? Put her in our basement. Like, they didn't, like, they had no plan. Like, I don't know. Like, I think there's a big difference because your tweet, if I remember correctly, was, I've never burned a police car, but fuck it, let's riot against fascism, which... Yes. Obviously, you're making a point through humor.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden,
that's me.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I've gotten that, like, just from the first moment we started talking. I'm like, oh, okay, like that makes a lot of sense. But then you get all these people that are like, she should resign. You're inciting violence, and I love that you came out very clearly and you were like, you don't understand what it meant. And I'm not going anywhere. Like, you know, like, it wasn't, because there's some people that say things and it's very much who they are, and then they end up apologizing for saying that thing. And
sorry. Yeah. I'm not.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I thought when I read that, and that was right before the election, that was November 2nd, right?
Yes.
So it wasn't like, I think that's what made it more funny to me, was that it was like, yeah, like, this is just the time that we're in, you know what I mean? And it's crazy. And again, like, if you can't just come out and say fascism is bad, like,
why is that so hard?
What's the problem? It blows my mind. Okay. So I wanted to talk about your story, because when I read your bio that you have on your website, so my wife works for a nonprofit in Nashville where she helps women get off opiates and all sorts of drugs and things like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She's the real, like, I sit in here and talk to people and just sound like an idiot and talk to smart people. And she goes out and does, like, hero stuff. So when I read your story, I was like, you have to check this out. So from what I understand, you played varsity lacrosse, right? And you tore both ACLs one after another, right? And then they gave you Vicodin, and this was what, like 2006. Okay, so talk a little bit about what happened after that, because I know in your bio you're saying, like, and you're right, like, we had no idea that the opioid epidemic wasn't kind of on the stage, the world stage, like it is now. So talk a little bit about what happened after that.
Cool. So it was about 18 months back to back that I was prescribed Vicodin, because it was like injury, surgery, rehab, and then injury, surgery, rehab. And then one day my prescription just stopped. And I was always taking them as I was supposed to, like, it's not like I was some angel before this happened. I'm sure I was drinking underage and smoking pot and stuff, but like nothing like this, And so I was just taking them as prescribed, as needed, whenever I'd have pain. And, to me, a part that's really ironic, my mom's a pharmacist. So we actually even knew more than other people would. Like, my mom held my prescription for me, and whenever I needed them, I'd be like, hey, Mom, my knees hurt, right? And given to me as needed, like the prescription said. And then one day they went away, and I was just miserable and sick, and I had no idea what was wrong with me. I mean, now I know I was experiencing my first of millions of withdrawal symptoms, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I was just telling a friend, and they were like, oh yeah, you're going through withdrawal, like very matter-of-factly, here, take this, and handed me a pill that, I found out later his little sister had cancer, and we were stealing her cancer medication, And so that was my senior year in high school. I went to college. I went to Duquesne University, which is right in downtown Pittsburgh. So I didn't really leave the environment I was in. And at the time, my parents didn't know what was going on, but I was buying pills on the street, spending a fortune, working a full-time job, going to college full-time just to support this pill habit, And then one day I gave somebody money. And my sophomore year in college, I gave somebody money to go get me pills, and they came back with heroin and said, well, this was all they had. And I was sick. Of course, whatever is going to make me feel better. And from there, it was just like hell, right? It was a blur. I was getting arrested all the time. After a while, my parents would like force me to go to rehab if I ever wanted to have a relationship with them again. I was like stealing my little brother's video games to sell them for drug money. I pawned my mom's engagement ring once, like really ratchet, nasty stuff that I know now because of years of therapy, wasn't me, was the drugs, but still was something that was like always really hard in my early recovery to just reckon with that. So eventually lost my driver's license. I ended up losing that for a decade. And we don't have the best public transportation system here in Pittsburgh. And so, living in my parents' basement as a grown adult, just so that they can drive me around places. And then I eventually was prescribed Suboxone, as, if friends familiar that it helps with withdrawal symptoms, helps wean you off opioids. And I just had no desire to stop using. I just wasn't ready. So I was selling my Suboxone, and I sold Suboxone to an undercover cop. And
that'll get you.
Yeah. You always, I say it all the time. You always see it on TV. You watch cops and you see people do it. And you're like, what an idiot. How could you sell drugs to a cop? I would know a cop if I saw it, but
he had the mustache. He had that cop mustache.
And it was like, I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was, it was bad. And so, I ended up getting charged, multiple felony charges, misdemeanor charges. And it was the first time I was in like serious trouble, right? But then again, I had a hearing and I'm released waiting trial. Still getting high. I am fortunate that I come from a family, we're like middle class, upper middle class. So my family had the means that they would buy me lawyers to keep me out of trouble, pay my bail so I didn't have to sit in there and like detox overnight. And so they bought me a fantastic, very expensive lawyer who got all my felony charges dropped, and I pled guilty to a misdemeanor and was on probation for 2 years. So like, here's Bethany, like skating by clean again, like no consequences for her actions. So of course, I'm still getting high, right? And I'm still using every day. And my life is, when, I don't know if people understand, like when you're actively using heroin, it's not like something you just do for fun, right? It's not like you're like, oh, it's Friday night, I'm going to go shoot some dope. It's like
getting some nachos and some heroin, like Friday, baby. Right. Maybe pop in a movie.
Yeah, like Netflix and heroin. Like, right. No, that's not how it goes, right? It's like from the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you pass out with a cigarette in your hand at night, like your whole life is getting money, getting drugs, doing drugs, repeat, right? So like I just was so lost in that mentality. Like drugs owned me. I had no control over my life anymore, and didn't even care though. That's the worst part, is I didn't even care. I just assumed I was going to die from an overdose someday, and that was that. I was never thinking about like my future or,
Right.
you know, going to get off the drugs. And so I was on probation because I got super lucky, and I was cheating my drug test. Every week I was going and getting drug tests and taking a child's urine to pass my drug test. And then one day, still to this day, I have no idea what happened. 8 months into my probation, my drug test that I cheated came up positive for opiates. And so they straight to jail. And now when you violate your probation, all the money in the world from mommy and daddy isn't getting you out of jail, right? I had a detainer, and that meant that I was sitting in jail until my judge thought I learned my lesson, you know? And so that ended up being a little under 6 months. And it was coincidentally during the 2016 presidential election. So I had been involved in politics a little bit, was involved in my local Democratic committee, worked to help some candidates get elected. You know, that was like something that I had no time or energy for because I was too busy. Heroin was my life, right? And so when I remember, I was sitting in my jail cell, right? 2016 presidential election. And I was watching the coverage on the TV in the pod. And all day it's like, oh, Hillary's going to win. She's going to pull off, and lights out, I get to bed. And then I remember it was like 2 a.m. and I woke up because I heard Donald Trump's voice come over the loudspeaker of the TV in the pod. And I was like, holy shit, like this changes everything. And, you know, it was the first time I ever had like a clear mind because I wasn't on any drugs or alcohol. I mean, you can't even smoke cigarettes in jail, you know? And so I just remember feeling so defeated, like it was my fault that Donald Trump got elected because I was sitting in jail instead of out knocking doors or, you know, going to fundraisers or whatever, making phone calls, whatever I could have done to prevent that. And so when I got out, it was the first Women's March. And, you know, they happen all over the country. And so I'm very lucky. My mentor, he was like, you're not going to sit at home and feel sorry for yourself. Like, we're going downtown and we're going to go march and we're going to fight to make sure, you know, the world doesn't end up as dark as we think it's going to be. Like,
right.
Foreshadowing, right? And so it's just from there, I was replacing all the time and energy I was spending on the drugs with something that was productive, and it was politics. And I realized that all the shit that I was so mad about, so angry that, you know, I'm sitting in this jail with, there's about, you know, 1,700 people in our jail. And so I'm in a pod with about 100 women who weren't criminals, weren't bad people, but were in there because they had a drug habit, or because they were selling drugs to support that drug habit, or for shoplifting to have food to eat, or for, you know, trespassing because they were in an abandoned building just to have shelter from the elements. Like, people who were not bad people who needed support and resources. And instead, our system, which is not broken, is very much so designed like this, just throws people in a cage, throws away the key, and is like, this is how we deal with these issues here. This is how we deal with mental health in this country. This is how we deal with substance use disorder in this country. And I was mad, and I was like, the only way I can fix this is to get more involved in politics. And so I really, you know, for a couple of years, everybody was like, what are you running for? What are you running for? I'm like, nothing. I just really love helping good people get elected. And then, you know, 2019, someone was like, you know what? You care about X, Y, Z. Well, there's this guy in office who's been here for 20 years and nobody's ever ran against them. So we think you should do it. And I was like, all right, let's go. And people laughed me out, you know, tried to laugh me out of a lot of rooms. I would walk in and tell people what I was running for, who I was running against. And, you know, he was part of a political dynasty family here in Allegheny County. He was on county council since its inception. His brother was the sheriff. I mean, his whole family was just entrenched. And everyone told me I could never, ever beat him, especially with my background. But, you know, I'm a big 8 Mile fan. And if you remember in the rap battle when Eminem's like, I'm going to tell you everything that you're going to say about me and you don't have anything. That's how I ran my campaign. I was like, the only way I'm doing this is if I can be me. I can walk into rooms instead of in a pantsuit and stilettos with jeans and sneakers, because that's who I am. And I can tell my whole entire story, because I don't want people voting for me without knowing what they're getting when they do that, because I know what it's like to have to vote for people and then be so disappointed. And so that's what I did. I was myself. I told my story. For the first few months, everybody's jaw would drop when I told it. And then I think people started to realize, like, she's serious. Like, she has real ideas from real experience and she's going to help us. And I won. Yeah, beat a 20-year incumbent. And I was the youngest person to ever be elected countywide in Allegheny County. I have the 7th largest legislative district in the entire country. Was the first person ever openly, formally incarcerated in long-term recovery from substance use disorder ever to run for office in the nation. So, like, things that I didn't realize at the time were groundbreaking until after the fact. And I'm like, well, I owe it to all these people who voted for me to prove them right, that they made the right choice. And that's what I've been doing every day since.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool. I think it just speaks to, sometimes, at least this is from my experience, you know, having friends who've kind of gotten into that life and stuff like that. It's almost like there's something missing, you know? And like, if you don't know what that is, then you're trying like whatever you can to kind of fill that hole. And, you know, I have a family member who, you know, in the 70s, they had a girlfriend who was sending them pot from Hawaii, and they were selling pot and drinking and doing this drug and that drug. And then they got into a motorcycle accident, all messed up, and survived, but found religion. And then religion kind of became that, like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I don't think it's necessarily religion for for everyone. Like, obviously for you, like, yours was serving people and wanting to change things. Do you think, because I know when you're in recovery, it's being, especially, and for people, you know, who've never, you know, been around it or haven't had it, it's not like you're just like, oh, well, I don't do heroin anymore. I never think about it.
That
you know?
easy.
It's like people who quit smoking cigarettes, that they're like, every day I'm like, I want a fucking cigarette. Yeah. Like, even my wife quit a long time ago, and still there's days where she's like, man, a cigarette sounds so good right now. So, you know, I don't think people understand that it's like, it's never something that's just like, oh yeah, I don't ever even think about it. So do you think in those moments that, like, the responsibilities that you have now to the people who believe in you, are those the things that kind of get you through any of those moments?
Oh, 110%. Yes, absolutely. I feel the exact same way, that it is a hole that people are trying to fill, right? Because my parents will tell you that when I was little, I had an addictive personality, you know, like that. It's always been me. It was just once I found heroin, it was a really, really bad thing for someone like me, right? But I have my favorite cousin in the whole world. She did the same thing. She found religion, and when she started her recovery, she was very young. She was like 20 when she started her recovery. She found religion, got married real quick, and ended up in a cult, right? But she never used again, you know, but she was in a really, really harmful situation. And then that took time after she finally escaped from that, because then she had to recover from that as well. I have a lot of friends who work a 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. I personally do not. And I spent a lot of years of actively using drugs being told that 12-step programs were the only way I was going to not die. I had to, you know, find a 12-step program, find meetings, find a sponsor, you know, follow their 12 steps religiously, speak to my higher power. And if I couldn't do all of those things perfectly, I was going to overdose and I was going to die. And I just could never accept that, because I tried the program. I tried the rooms. I was around so many friends who like I used to use with, and now they were working successful 12-step programs in their recovery. And it just never clicked for me. And I remember every day being so discouraged, like leaving an NA meeting and then going home to get high because like it just didn't do it for me, you know? So it wasn't until I realized, I think, that there were other ways, that everybody's recovery is unique and that no one should be shamed. Like I have friends who aren't shooting dope anymore because they're on methadone or because they're on Suboxone or because they're on Vivitrol. And that's not accepted in the 12-step program. But they're not shooting dope anymore. They're not stealing their parents' savings anymore and pawning their mom's engagement ring anymore. And yet that 12-step program is not accepting of them because they don't think that they're, sober. And so I saw so much of that, and I lost so many friends to overdoses because after a period of sobriety, when you use again, that's when you're most likely to overdose because your tolerance is down and, just the
you're trying to party like you used to. Like, I can.
You try to, though.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that's what was the hardest part for me is early in recovery and even now. I mean, I just celebrated 4 years back in August. And even now, the hardest part for me and when I have the worst day is not when someone's calling me a bitch on social media. Like if that's the worst that you have to do is to like call me names. I have been through the ringer. I have, shot dope with puddle water. I've lived in a car in Walmart parking lots, right? Like I've been not allowed in my own family functions, like nothing you can say to me can hurt me. But what hurts me is that I feel a lot of guilt that like I quote unquote got out, and I've been to so many funerals for so many people that I love so much that didn't have the opportunity to experience just how amazing recovery can be. And it can be amazing because you found God and you think that's great. It can be amazing because you got your kids back, or you got your house back, or you got your job back, or it can be amazing just because like me, I get to serve so many people, 1.3 million people every day. Like there's nothing to me that's more rewarding than that. But so many people never got to experience any of that, and that hurts me. And every time I start feeling like real awesome, I'm like, shit, I wish, he was here to see this, or she was here to experience this with me, or they could have seen me get sworn into office, but they couldn't, And so that's hard for me, but I'm super high strung, super high energy, super sociable. Like that to me is like very important part of my recovery. I don't work a 12-step program. I didn't find God, but I have an awesome support system. I have, meetings all day, every day, and before COVID, events to go to and just stuff to do. And I've been able to experience getting my license back, paying off my fines. $30-some thousand in fines I accrued over 10 years of using drugs, I bought my first house, which is being renovated right now, like I am in a committed relationship. Like my parents and I and my siblings, we have the best relationship we ever had. It took a lot of family therapy to get there, and it took a lot of personal therapy to get me here. But like, shit is pretty good right now. I just applied to law school. Like that was a dream that I had when I was in high school that I completely skipped over. I lost 10 years of my life. From 16 to 26, arguably some of the best years of my life. Like my college experience was not frat parties and beer pong. It was, like cold sweats in my dorm room with no food because I spent all my food money from my parents on drugs, and like
trying to hide it from people. And
yeah, I lived a double life for a really long time. It wasn't until probably a year or two after I switched from pills to heroin that like everyone kind of knew, like my family. But like even then I'd go to jail or go to rehab and my parents would tell my aunts and uncles I was on vacation, like
she's in the Hamptons. She's taking a summer.
Yeah, she just, her life's so great that she's just going down to a 90-day resort, and like it was just exhausting. And so that's my favorite part about Bethany today is I am so me, and I don't give a damn what anyone has to say about it, because I know that I'm authentic, and I know that the work that I do, the majority of the legislation that I introduced, I didn't come up with it. a constituent told me that it was something that would make their life better. And so, you know what? I just went and introduced it, and lobbied for it and researched for it and did work around it. Like, it is so fulfilling to me to be able to do that, right? As opposed to what everything used to be like, and really just be myself and focus on the things that are important, because I feel like I owe that to myself, and I especially owe it to my support system, who stuck by me when shit was really rough and really bad, and loved me from a distance when they had to, and like smothered me when that's what I needed, And so I'm just like on cloud 9 in life, and have to make sure that I never, ever forget how it used to be, because I've seen people with 10 years in recovery, start using again and overdose and die. And so I know that it doesn't matter how much time I put between myself, and my battles. It's always there. And I just think it keeps me on my toes for other things, because I'm already on my toes for that.
Yeah. And again, I think that's something that people don't really understand, like it's one of those things where, like, unless you've lived it, I don't think you or like have somebody close who's lived it, you don't understand the certain set. It's like, well, it's been 10 years. You're fine now. You know what I mean? Where, I think of someone like in our house, we're a big fan of Dak Shepard. Like, I do a podcast. I love his podcast. He'd been sober for years, and then same thing, hurt his knee. And they were like, well, just take these pills. And he was like, oh, okay. And then, it's like, it doesn't matter how many years you have under your belt. Like, you have to remember where you came from. And I think something that it's so refreshing about you is that I personally have a really hard time with people with a victim mentality, which is probably why I don't like our president, because it's, look what you're doing to me. You're stolen. So when there's someone like you who says, yeah, like, this shit happened, I made some bad choices, but I looked at it and I said, this is not who I'm going to be. And I'm going to use what I have to help other people. Like, that's my favorite kind of story in the world, is to see someone that is like, yes, this happened to me, but this is not an excuse for me to be to say that my life is over. Well, this happened, so now that's why I'm this way, because that drives me insane.
But it's so easy to feel that way. I mean, when I got out of jail, I had no job, no license. I was on probation. I was in the world without drugs or alcohol for the first time in, over a decade. I felt like that. I felt like, woe is me. I might as well just go back to using, because I don't have anything. And just so as quickly as I thought that was as quick as my support system really just came in and was like, I don't think so. Like, we're not letting that happen. And so to me, when I meet people, because as you can imagine, I have a lot of people who are, actively using drugs or in recovery who reach out to me because, as I mentioned earlier, they've been looking for someone like them with their experiences, who was making decisions to help them. Like things like, safe injection sites, things like making Narcan just as widely available as Tylenol is, things like just harm reduction practices in general, not making it that couples can't go into rehab facilities together, not banning smoking in rehab facilities, because really we just need you there to save your life, talking about a safe supply of drugs, which I know is something that people find very controversial, but as someone who has had someone die in their lap, as someone who has had someone die on the floor next to them and had to resuscitate them, as someone who has lost so many people that they love to overdoses, like, to me, more than anything, a safe supply is the solution. And the only way to do that is to decriminalize drugs. Yeah. And people don't like to talk about that. People think that's so absurd, but it saves money. It keeps people unnecessary out of jail. It makes money for the resources that we need in mental health treatment, because a lot of people with substance use disorder are dual diagnosed with a mental health condition as well. And it makes a supply safe. We're seeing it happening with cannabis. I think that's a great first step. And we're starting to see other states talking about decriminalizing all drugs. It's starting, but, I think that that's the next frontier. I don't know if a majority of folks are there yet, but to me, that's something that's really, really important to me, because of the personal impact that, black market drugs have had on my life and how many people I've seen hurting. And I mean, I've watched a mother find out that her kid overdosed and died, and like that sound of like, it's like a screeching, horrible like groan from someone like finding out that their child just died. Like that's something that I hear like in my nightmares. And I know that there are solutions to this. This isn't an unwinnable war, right?
Right.
To me, the war on drugs is making people who want to use drugs, making it safer for them to do so, as opposed to the war on drugs that we've experienced, which have, over incarcerated folks, have completely ignored adequate mental health treatment, and really just torn our country apart, especially in lower income and minority communities.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely agree. It's so easy to look at people like they're criminals as opposed to the fact that like you're sick, and like you said, like it most of the time it comes along with some kind of mental health issue or like personality disorder or something like that. Like there are certain people who are wired to be like, oh yeah, this shit will be like super fun for me. You know what I mean? To a point. And then it's like, okay, it's not fun anymore, but now I have to do it. And it's, you look at, I think, don't quote me on this, because again, I'm not a smart man. I just like talking to smart people, but I think it was like Sweden had something like 30 overdoses or like 60, somewhere between there. And then the United States is we have like thousands upon thousands every year. And it's for that reason. It's because, it's not like it's necessarily the heroin that's killing people. It's the fentanyl and like whatever other bullshit is
that poison.
Yeah. Where you can, in other countries, you can go someplace safe. You know exactly what you're getting. And that's the other thing for me too, that kind of like, I don't know if you feel this way, but it blows my mind because there's people that are like, well, if we decriminalize all drugs and everyone's going to start doing heroin.
No,
and it's like, no. Dude, I know enough about meth to know that even if it was legal tomorrow, I don't have great teeth. I like having them. You know what I mean? Like, I'll take what I got instead of nothing. I'm not going to go out and just be like, happy election. I'm a meth head now. It doesn't work that way. So I think you're right where it's, let's look at it for what it is an illness and people that need treatment and that not one size fits everything, right? 12-step programs are not for Suboxone or methadone. If that's what it takes for you to like not put a gun in somebody's face to take their money, like right. Fucking here, have all of it, Right. And then I don't know, like, how do you think we remove the stigma? Because I feel like that's a big thing. It's like everyone loves like the comeback kid story. You know what I mean? But for people who aren't there yet, or what is like on average, the average person who gets clean is going to relapse like twice or something before they get, it's probably more than that. But like, how do we get rid of the stigma and kind of open people's minds to be like, hey, this person isn't a piece of shit. Like, how do we help them?
We talk about it. We like I said, whenever I was actively using, how my family lied to my relatives, understandably so, because they thought that it would cast like a black cloud over them, So I think that talking about it, because one, it opens the line of communication. If we take the shame away from using drugs, people are more likely to talk about it. When they're ready to stop, they feel more comfortable coming to someone and saying, yo, I need some help. Or like telling their boss, hey, I need to take 30 days sabbatical because I need to go into a rehab facility. Like, that is just not stuff that happens now. People don't just talk about struggles with drug use like that. And so I think that really, that's at least how I try to do it, is I truly believe that showing stories of recovery and stories of people actively using drugs are what we need, because I know I've seen so many stories of people using drugs, and it's always the under a bridge, like haven't showered in a couple weeks. Well, like, you need to also be talking about like the soccer mom who's popping Xanny bars to get through every day. You know what I mean? Like you need to also be talking about the people who are in recovery and accomplishing awesome things, like showing that that's possible. And so to me, stigma is really just about like bringing it out of the shadows, bringing it out of the closet and having dialogue about it. And I believe that before we accomplish any real reform, like any real harm reduction gets implemented, we have to break the stigma. Because if we don't do that first, no one's ever going to be supportive of anything else. We need to be putting faces of regular people on substance use disorder and on mental health diagnoses. Like when I walked into a room and I told you I'd tell my story and people's jaws would drop, it was because they saw this, decent looking white chick from the suburbs, like, saying that she was shooting dope a couple years ago, and was in jail a couple years ago. And to them, they had never had that face to them. And so I think we need to, help people. Like, and when I tell my story, it helps other people be like, you know what? I've never told anybody this before, but I had a, really tough time for a couple years with this substance, or, I'm currently struggling with this, or I just lost my partner to this, And so I really believe that just having open dialogue about it and having people who are in the mainstream, who are, in the public eye, who aren't, I hate the word addict, but because it has this super negative connotation. And that's why I used to call myself a recovering addict. I don't call myself that anymore because of what addict means to people. Instead, I'm a person in recovery, right? And that's me. I am a person first. My recovery is next. And so always using like people first language, always understanding that you can't force someone to get help when they're not ready. You can make it really easy for them to get that help when they're ready. But the best thing you can do for someone who's using right now is to help them use safely, as opposed to just jamming 12-step programs or rehabs or anything down their throat. When they're ready, they'll come to the 12-step program. They'll come to the rehab. They'll come asking for help, but the help needs to be there and needs to be available. And in this country, I don't believe that we have made recovery and safe drug use, both of those things, a priority. And that's why we're seeing astronomical rates of overdose deaths, because, a lot of people don't have health care. I remember I was so fortunate, when I first was starting to go to rehab, I was still on my parents' insurance. I was a student and still on my parents' insurance. Like, I know people who die waiting to get a bed in a rehab facility. Like, not just some like anecdotal story. I know people who have died waiting to go to rehab because they didn't have insurance and there were a limited number of no insurance beds. That is a reality. I know lots of people who go to jail or prison, right? Corrections is what we call that, right? Correctional facilities, but there's no rehabilitation that happens. There's no corrections that happens. So they go to jail, whether it be for a week or a year, and they come out, go right back to using and die. Like those,
or they go back to jail because they're now set up that like you're in the system now.
Exactly. And by the time they're out, they've lost everything. So why not go back to what I was doing before? I have no reason to be here. Like we need to, society needs to provide that reason, provide that motivation, be educating folks in jail and, offering medicated assisted treatment in jail and for free to people on the streets, and just like taking care. Like I'm a big, Mr. Rogers, right? Like big, like taking care of your neighbor in a sense of community. And that's what I don't see. And to me, that's the most dangerous aspect of, this epidemic that we're seeing.
Yeah. And I definitely agree. I think, to kind of tie it back to what we were talking about before, it's also the branding, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not an addict. I'm a person in recovery. And I think you said it's when you get out, like I've lost everything because you don't have that. I think not everybody is, and I'm sure there's like some level of like fortunate to it. And then some level of like, if I wouldn't have had this support system, would I have turned around quicker? But like, you had your family, you know what I mean? Where, we come out now, no rehabilitation, anything like that. You're out of prison and then you're labeled criminal, addict. I don't have anything to help.
Life.
Right. And I don't, and I'm not this is America, buddy. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you want to make something of yourself. And we don't offer anything. And I'm with you. Like, I think everyone should have health. I think it's fucking ridiculous. We live in one of the wealthiest country. Up until Trump, we were, looked at as like the country, you know what I mean? And then, but we got people that are losing their houses from medical bills, or like you said, passing away because they can't get to recovery, when we can give everybody some form of universal health care, and then like let people pay if you want like the bells and whistles, you know what I mean? You want to pay extra.
You want the bougie package.
Right. Like I want the flat screen. I want the flat screen in my hospital bed, Well, I know we've been going now. It's Jesus, 9 o'clock where you are now. So I appreciate you hanging in with me. I did the last thing that I wanted. Well, I had two final questions for you. One is, what's next for you? Because I know you said that, you're not in this position forever. What do you see yourself doing in the future, or how are you planning on continuing to serve?
Wow, if I had a nickel for every time I got asked that question, John.
Well, I will send you a nickel.
I don't know. And I feel like it's funny because whenever I have asked other elected officials that and they don't have an answer, I'm like, all right, buddy, I'm sure you don't know what's next for you, right?
Bullshit. No.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people have this whole game plan planned out. I never planned to run for office in the first place. It was just something almost like a necessity. I felt like I needed to run for office because no one was fighting for what I thought needed to be fought for. I really like county politics. I do know that. I just bought a house in the city of Pittsburgh, so I'm moving to the city. So we'll see if city politics, who knows? I don't really like state level politics, federal politics. I am a firm all politics is local person. To me, it was so much more important to me that we work to flip the PA House as opposed to, flip the United States Senate. But, but I do not know. I just applied to law school. So that is definitely the very next thing in the pipeline. Waiting for an engagement ring is also on my list. If we're being honest, right?
I'll make sure I send this episode to him. You tag him in all your Instagrams, so I'll make sure I cut a clip and be like, hey, buddy.
John, if you think that he doesn't know, if you think I don't accidentally send him the link to the ring I want all the time.
My finger looks lonely. It just needs an accent piece.
Really big hands, so it's gonna need a really big ring. And he's like, okay, So
I need something I just can't even wave. It's just hi, good to see you.
I have to pick my wrist up like this. But those are like the two things on my pipeline right now. I mean, I've only been in my term for a year. It's a 4-year term, right? So I would have to run again to keep my seat in 2023, which 2020 was the longest year ever. So if 2021's anything like that, 2023 is like a different world. So really what I'm working on now, I have a couple pieces of legislation right now that I've introduced that are really, really important to me. I've been doing a lot of work around the jail and around facial recognition technology, banning profits from making profits off of incarcerated people, phone calls, comments, like that. I have a no-knock warrant piece of legislation, a police review board, paid sick days. I have a lot of legislation that's already been introduced that is like coming down the pipeline in the next couple months for votes. So that's, a lot of my work is on that. But to me, actually, most importantly in 2021 is using my platform to help elect local elected officials. So that's your school board, your borough council, board of commissioners, city council, county council. Like that's where my passion really is, because I recognize, I try to explain this to people who only vote for the president. Like, listen, when you have a pothole in your road, you're not calling up Joe Biden and saying, yeah, can you come fix my road? You're calling your town commissioner, and when you're pissed that your kids aren't learning about a particular subject matter in school, you're not calling your congressperson. That's your school board member who often, those races are decided often. I've seen ties in municipal races, those races are often won with a couple hundred votes, and they're so important and so underpaid and so undervalued. But that's what's on the ballot in 2021. And that's what I'm going to be dedicating to, with the experience that I learned from running a successful campaign, with the experience that I've gained from seeing other people do it and see it done a bunch of different ways. Like, I want to help people, again, eventually take my job from me. That to me is the end game of all of this, is to continue the work that I'm doing, to know that when I leave office, the work that I'm doing isn't done. And that it will continue on with other people fighting for the same thing, hopefully way more radical than me even, So as far as what office, I do not know. I just know that right now I have a lot of work to do. And we have a 12-3 Democratic majority on county council, but that does not mean that votes go 12-3. Most of those Democrats are Democrats in name only, right? But so I have a lot of work ahead of me, but I've made it through tougher times, so.
Well, we'll have to get back together in 2024 because I want to see if you have the Obama effect where you go in looking real young, and then I'm going to see you in 4 years and your hair's all gray.
Hair, bald spots.
So, and what you're telling me is you don't want to be the next Pelosi doing the Beyonce clap. That's not on your radar.
No.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. There's something about someone like you who you're so. It's refreshing to hear someone, especially with all this Hunter Biden stuff, you know what I mean? It's refreshing for someone to come out and be like, yeah, man, people have problems, but that those problems don't define who that person is. And it's possible to elevate yourself above those problems and reach your full potential as a human being. You know what I mean? I think that's really, really cool. And I think that, your story it's got to be crazy to have a story that can inspire people in ways that you would never imagine. You know what I mean?
Especially when you don't realize that your story is that, that's hard.
Yeah.
When people are like, oh, I read your story. It's amazing. And I'm like, I never saw it as that. I just never imagined. But the one thing I did learn from the thousands of 12-step meetings that I've been to is my favorite thing is a saying that they say in the rooms. It's, you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And I truly feel above all else that's what I'm doing, right? I'm keeping my recovery and I'm keeping the good things that are happening to me and my successes by constantly talking about where I've been and talking about how I got here and teaching, giving away the knowledge and the experience that I have so that, not another person has to die from this disease. Not another person has to rot in jail and lose everything they've ever worked for when all they really just needed is someone to help them out, So that's, that's how I think it should be.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I don't know, there's certain people that I get to talk to that towards the end of the conversation, I'm just like, okay, this person was put on the planet to do something good, and it's cool that I have the opportunity to sit down and not only hear the story, but hopefully the people listening to the show, it'll inspire them as well. And the last thing that I wanted to ask you is as someone who's gone through your own battles and someone who has figured out the best way for you to be able to serve others and to be involved in your community. If there's someone listening and they're like, hey, I want to get involved with my community, or I want to, help serve, or, I've been thinking about it. I know a lot of the times for people that may have that urge, figuring out where to start can be very overwhelming. So what advice would you give to someone who, is trying to get involved locally?
So The first thing is to look for who is helping already, right? Like, we never want to reinvent the wheel. I promise that no matter where you are, there are people doing good work for the community. They may not be as visible as you wish they would be, but they're everywhere. Are good people doing good work for the community. So I would say my first thing would be to seek out something like that. If you're interested in running for office, go and volunteer on a campaign, a local campaign, someone who could really use your help. Knock some doors, make some phone calls, just learn what it's about. You know, like, I had volunteered on a ton of campaigns before I ran my own, and I thought I knew it all until it was my own. Like, oh, this is a lot different than I thought it was. But that, you know, experience of learning and helping to make the community what you see as best, right? To best serve the people of your community. It doesn't have to be running for office. That's always going to be what I suggest, because if you're anything like me, you don't see anyone currently in elected office doing what you know needs to be done, right? But that's not for everyone, and that's something that I've unfortunately come to realize. I wish it was for everyone, and I meet so many awesome people, and I want them all to just run for office all over the country and all the offices. And I realize that that's not for anyone. So, you know, there is always activism happening in the community, you know, whether it's, you know, especially during COVID, there are so many people in need. Even just, you know, going to a food bank and helping give some food out. You don't even have to have any money. People always think, throw money a problem. I'm broke. You know, like, I can't donate money to causes or candidates that I care about, but I can donate my time. And to me, when someone donates their time to me, it means so much to me, because I know that you can't put a price tag on that time. And so, you know, again, especially during COVID, there's, you know, drive up food distributions. There's car caravans for different causes. I know we have them sometimes where they drive past our jail, just honking, letting people inside know they're out here thinking about you and fighting for you. You know, issues-based activism can be so, so powerful. But I just think that you need to find what fills that hole for you, right? Because we all have holes, right? We all do.
Yes, we do.
But really, it's just like figuring out what it is that fulfills you. And, you know, I'm fortunate that I live a life where, like, if something doesn't make me happy, I just stop doing it, you know? And so, you know, I hope that everyone someday gets to experience what that's like. But until then, I think just looking for something that you're passionate about. If you like dogs, go hook up with your local animal friends, right? If you like nature, go help restore a trail in the woods. You know what I mean? If you like, you know, kids, help out at a daycare, or, you know, there's a lot of like mutual aid organizations that provide childcare and food, you know, all encompassing. There's just so many people, especially now, unfortunately, that need so much help. And if there's one thing that COVID really did as a benefit, is that is exposed. It brought into the light how close we all are to being homeless, how close we all are to not having food in the fridge, how close we all are to losing our job and therefore our health care, right? These things, these issues of society that we all knew have been here for so long are in the open for everyone to see. So I do believe that now more than ever is a great time to find out how you can help. And it's nothing feels better than seeing somebody smiling and knowing that you helped do that, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And it's you know, I've been fortunate enough that the company that I work for in my day job, we do a lot of volunteer stuff. So I've worked food banks and stuff like that. And it's like you said, like, you know, time's the one thing I can give $50 to a you know, a program or a cause, and I can make that $50 back. But when you go and you pack food boxes all day, or like supply boxes, and you come home and your back, you know, you're like, your back hurts like you did some work to help people. That's a completely different feeling than being like, oh yeah, well, I typed in my debit card number, you know, and was like, here you go. So, I know we're pretty late, and I really appreciate you being here. We will go ahead and wrap it up, but will you stick around for me for a couple minutes after we're all set?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to Miss Bethany Hallam. This is episode number 44. over a year. It's crazy. I thank you so much for being here during this crazy week. I'm so glad that you were the guest that I had on this week. And we will link up your website as well. So if people want to go and read about you and figure out ways to get involved, you guys can go in the show notes right now, click the link, pop the website up, get to know Bethany because she's absolutely awesome. So this is the Johnversations Podcast. I am Don Lemon, and we will see you guys next week.